Our reading from the Old Testament today is Psalm 1, and I'm reading the New International Version, and it can be found in your Pew Bibles on page 489. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff, like the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction.
Next scripture reading comes from Mark's Gospel, chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. I'll be reading from the Common English Bible, so it'll vary a little slightly if you're reading along with the Pew version. But from there, Jesus and his followers went through Galilee, but he didn't want anyone to know it. This was because he was teaching his disciples. The human one will be delivered into human hands, and they will kill him. 3 days after he is killed, he will rise up. But they didn't understand this kind of talk, and they were afraid to ask him. They entered Capernaum. When they had come into a house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about during the journey?" They didn't respond, since on the way they had been debating with each other about who was the greatest. He sat down and called the 12 and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be least of all and the servant of all." And Jesus reached for a little child and placed him among the 12 and embraced him. But then he said, "Whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me isn't actually welcoming me, but rather the one who sent me." Now, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So what are certain times or points in your life where you felt most welcome? And take a few seconds to kind of think back to one of those instances or moments and kind of how you felt in that case. Or was there a time or a point in your life where you visited a church for the first time, but it felt like you had been there forever? Was there an instant or a moment where you've been invited to someone's house as a guest and they immediately made you feel comfortable and treated you like family? Or maybe you were one of the hundreds or thousands of guests at a party, but some way or another you felt as if you were the guest of honor. You were the most important person there by the way you were treated or welcomed or interacted with by someone else. Some of these moments are quite memorable, right? Others may be a little forgettable. But it's within these moments that I truly feel we begin to understand and relate to what Jesus was trying to say to his disciples that day, based upon what we have from this account in Mark's Gospel. You see, there's one thing that I've come to learn over the years, quickly and abundantly about Christ, through my studies and my upbringing in the Presbyterian Church. That is the undeniable fact that Jesus Christ was a firm believer in radical hospitality. Or to put it quite simply, Christ at his core, what I like to call, was truly welcoming. So except for some extreme cases, there were not many instances where Christ was approached by someone where he ended up turning them away. And mind you, he was approached by people from all walks of life. Tax collectors, prostitutes, people that were destitute, lepers, paralytics, king, common folk, brothers and sisters, and even those that continued to loathe him. He was even bold enough to admit that in a roundabout way he was resented by others because of his radical and countercultural ways of life. His far-reaching hospitality and his encouragement to the poor, and that they are in fact blessed, was not seen in great light by most people. His adamant stance that people on the margins of society have a place of prominence in God's kingdom, as opposed to the kings and the tax collectors of that day, was not always well received by the people in those certain positions. So as a result of this radical hospitality and truly welcoming nature of Jesus Christ, one of our concerted efforts here at TPC in the recent months or the past year or so may have been something that you either have or have not noticed. We've begun to intentionally include children as a part of the worship service during both the 9 and the 11 o'clock services. So typically they'll hand out bulletins to people that are entering through the narthex. They'll light the candles. They'll receive the offering and extinguish the candles at the end of the service. So we feel this is a very important part of the lifeblood here at TPC. Furthermore, studies have shown that while everything may not always flow perfectly with children involved, right? You see how this morning that it took a little while to do the candles, and that's okay. A few weeks ago, one of the children dropped one of the offering plates, but it really made everybody wake up in church, right? Maybe I need to do that more often. But everything doesn't always go 100% smooth with children. Even when I'm up here, I don't do everything 100% perfect all the time. But that's not what God is looking for. You see, God is wanting us to open our doors to anyone that comes through them and welcome them with an open heart and an open mind. But by having children involved in this service, it does convey a very important message. And that important message is that those children too are important. It instills in the children a sense of ownership, responsibility, and vitalness to this congregation. It makes them feel as if they have a true place here at this church, which, of course, they do. And not only that, but we feel it conveys a message of radical hospitality, one that's echoed in Christ's message that we heard today from Mark's gospel. The children are welcome. And not only are they welcome, but they are important to the life of the church. This in turn allows families to feel relaxed and comfortable, welcomed, and as if they are a friend and family member here too. So Christ seems to be very clear with this sentiment of this last verse from today's reading, where he proclaims, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." It's a pretty important welcoming chain, if you ask me. In fact, in one of my favorite commentaries on this very passage from Feasting on the Word, I usually will read a commentary or two throughout the week to kind of get some kind of focus or guidance, and won't always use it. But this one, there was a particular professor that had an interesting little nugget of information. His name was Nathan G. Jennings. He's assistant professor of liturgics and Anglican studies from the Episcopal Theological Seminary in Austin, Texas. It's actually not far from where I went to seminary, and some of our students would go to this school, and vice versa, they would come to ours. But here's what Professor Jennings wrote. He said, "This text has some obvious implications for the lives of Christian disciples trying to live in community with one another," which would be us, kind of the church specifically, and TPC to be even more specific, kind of talking directly to us. He mentions how this is one of many gospel texts that show that leadership and authority among the Christian community is based upon service and humility. So the disciples have trouble understanding Christ's teachings about being Messiah. And they directly following this, he shows them that the leadership in the community is like receiving a child. And so one obvious literal ramification of the text would be to ask, how does our congregation minister to children? And next would follow questions based upon the analogy of children to other people who are vulnerable or low in social status, the marginalized, the poor, the other races. So I'm not sure if you realize this, but that quote had two kind of, what I feel are key cogs to this service and this kind of hospitality, radical hospitality that Christ is calling us to partake in. So the two major things that stuck out were service and humility, right? From that quote. So when it comes to making others feel welcomed, we need to approach that subject with both of those traits, with a sense of service and a sense of humility about us. But it all begins with a servant's heart. We need to realize and maybe stop and think, what can I do to make someone feel more relaxed or comfortable or more at ease, or how can I kind of take their stress away? From there, we transition to, what can I do for them? Or what can I give them? Or how can I help them? Or what could I say to them to make them feel at peace, at ease, or at home? A servant's heart is one that is always concerned and thinking about the presence and the thoughts and the feelings and the concerns of the other person. So this was a big reason why Jesus never really turned anyone away. He had a servant's heart. He truly cared for others and was concerned about their feelings and their well-being in what we call truly welcoming. In fact, as I alluded to earlier, think back to that time in which you received that warm, welcoming feeling. Or maybe you were on the receiving end of servitude more specifically. Now, how did that make you feel? Well, think of the time you visited a hotel with maybe a concierge service and the feeling associated with that. Or think of that time you attended another church and what made you feel welcome? Or what made you feel distant or pushed away or unwelcome? What about the times you've been over to a relative's house or a friend's house? Did they make you feel welcome too? Or did they make you dress up in a hazmat suit and not touch anything on the shelves, right? See, we can feel welcome and we can convey that message to other people too. So I remember some of the moments of my life where I've been on the receiving end of service and it made me feel great and important and valued, right? Even most recently, I went on that Disney cruise this past spring, and there were waiters that waited on us at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There was a guy that would make up our messy room in the morning and turn down the beds at night, so when we got in late in those sleepy nights with the girls, they could just climb up into their bunk beds and go to sleep. Yeah, they got paid for it, but that's not the point. It still made me feel special, right? Being on the receiving end of those acts of service really goes a long way towards filling one's heart and contentment. The humility aspect we come across a little later in Christ's sentiments, but it's a message that is proclaimed loud and clear. And it's something that we kind of see throughout Christ's ministry. So especially when it pertains to hospitality and leadership and welcoming others, Christ is insistent that we take a stance of humility. Well, why is humility important, you might ask? Why does that really even matter? I feel I can still serve without being humble, right? But if we're constantly thinking about others, think about it on this psychological level. Say we know someone and we think that, oh, maybe they're better than us, or they're more capable than us on a project, or they're more gifted than us with solving some kind of problem, or maybe they're more deserving than us with something else. Now, how do you think that affects our servant's heart, right? It makes us more inclined to want to serve and have the mindset to serve other people. It encourages us to feel that the other person is deserving of that service, and not that we are not necessarily, but that person certainly is. So we don't lessen ourselves, but we think of someone else as greater in our presence. So it elevates their life, and it gives their personhood and their life more importance. So by remaining humble, we often look to other people that are, we see them as equals, if not more deserving of our time, our energy, and our focus and our imagination. So, kind of ironically, both the service and humility seem to go hand in hand, right? They feed off one another. So by having a serving heart, we are in essence being humble. And by being humble, we are seeking to serve and revere other people. You see how close those two are connected? And by being humble, we'll want to serve more. By serving more, we will, in essence, be more humble. Kind of the cyclical mental state and heart state that we have with that. So in addition to the hospitality, there's been one other thing that I've discovered and realized in life that is kind of important, and it's positioning. And by that, I mean our physical and sometimes even mental positioning of ourselves in life. So this is true, particularly if we view this aspect of, in light of Jesus' firm statement. Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servants of all. So think of this positioning as a whole and how subtle it can be, but also how important and how big of a message it really conveys. Now Christ is saying, put yourself last. If there's a line, don't jump to the front, Joe, go right to the very end. So if we jump to that front, what's the message that we're sending? We're saying that, oh, my life is more important than yours. So I need to cut in line and you guys can all wait and I'll just go on right ahead. But if we go to the back, then what's the message that's sent there? So, oh, you guys are more important or not as equal to me. So we all deserve to kind of wait and I'll put myself last so that you may go first. So let me give you a couple more kind of concrete examples to kind of lay this out and spell this out for you. So with a king, we don't have a king, but we kind of know what kings are. And I kind of base my kings off of Game of Thrones or other things like that, right? No, just kind of history class and studies. So a king typically has a throne, right? The big banquet hall or a big hall, really right at the end, you can see this giant throne that a king will typically sit on. And the people that sit next to the king usually have their seats a little bit lower. That's why you have the king's right-hand man and whoever's on the left. But what's the message that is being sent there? The message says, I'm the most important person in the room. You should give me respect in the time of day. And people that sit lower than me have this kind of forced humility that I place upon them. So my life is more important. I deserve all the attention that the room can give me. So think about it in this kind of other situation. What's the message that is sent if someone is being threatening to another person, or whether that be a child or an adult or a peer? So if one cares about the person being bullied or hurt or intimidated, they'll usually physically place their body between the perpetrator and the person being intimidated, right? So either whether it's with, kind of violence or intimidation, you'll put yourself between that person and the person doing the offense and saying, no, this stops or I will be the one to intervene. So what's the message that's said when the body is positioned in that way? It says, I value the person behind me that I am protecting. That this person's life matters, and I'm going to do what I can to save them and help them and place my life between the offenders and theirs. So, as humans, it's kind of just a natural inclination of ours to want to be in a point of prominence like a king. See, we love to sit in those important places and garner respect and power and that feeling of importance, right? And now those feelings can be justified, and that's fine. We can feel like that. We can't really affect how we feel, but we can affect how we act. So the actions that usually follow that are ones that we can control or can kind of influence. So it's up to us to decide whether we will approach life with humility or expect to be given reverence by others that serve us. So which of these two examples do you feel Christ followed? Right? One of service and one of humility. So in order for us to be truly welcoming to others and to see others in that light, we must position ourselves last. We have to engage in life's activities with both a serving heart and a sense of humility. This, as with most of Christ's teachings, is particularly difficult and challenging, and it's a mindset and a place of our heart that we have to work on. We have to find a way to grow this and help this and foster this and practice it on a daily basis. It doesn't do any good to say, oh yeah, I know I could be a better servant, or I know I could be more humble, but I'm just not going to work on it. I'm not going to do that. That's too hard. I don't need to be humble. I'm humble enough, right? I'll just brag about our humble nature. So instead, we have to really live it. We have to live it by ensuring that guests in our personal and church home feel welcome. We cannot make them feel like an inconvenience or a nuisance. Instead, we must show them we come to them with a humble heart and a sense of humility and servitude. So think of it as we are tasked to care for others before we care for ourselves, right? On a specific level, we need to roll out the red carpet. We need to refrain from critical remarks or talking about ourselves too much in a conversation. We need to ensure that others feel important, that we're paying attention to them in our presence, we're listening to them and making good eye contact with them. We need to make sure that we respect and admire others while still remaining confident in ourselves. So through all of these specific acts, we'll continually condition our hearts and our minds to enter kind of into this service and humility mode. So for it is in that mode That we realize God loved us before we ever had the chance to even love God. So we, in turn, need to do that same favor to everyone else. Amen.